My daughter sold their house for $500,000 and let her husband blow every single penny in 3 months. When they showed up at my door begging to move in, I said no. That's when my son-in-law raised his hand and slapped me right across the face. Before we continue, let me thank you for watching Grandmother's Tales. Please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We might give you a shout-out in our next video. Today's special shout-out goes to Linda Martinez from Phoenix. Thank you for being part of our family. Let me tell you the whole story. My name is Rosa, and at 65, I thought I knew my daughter well enough to trust her judgment. I thought the woman I raised would never let a man destroy everything she worked for. But that Tuesday morning in October changed everything I believed about family, trust, and the length some people will go to take advantage of others. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard car doors slam in my driveway. The sound wasn't right somehow. Too urgent, too heavy. When I looked through my window, I saw my daughter, Esperanza, standing next to her blue Honda with her husband, Diego. But they weren't carrying the usual flowers or small gifts they brought during their monthly visits. Diego had 2 large suitcases beside him, and Esperanza was pulling boxes from her trunk. Her face was red and puffy, like she'd been crying for hours. "Mom!" Esperanza called out, her voice shaking as she walked toward my front door. "We really need to talk." I set down my coffee mug and opened the door, studying their faces. Something was terribly wrong. Esperanza looked exhausted, her usually neat hair messy and uncombed. Diego stood behind her in his expensive leather jacket, the one that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping aside to let them in. "Is everything okay?" They walked into my small living room, their footsteps heavy on my carpet. I watched Diego's eyes move around my home, examining my furniture and family photos like he was calculating something. "Mom, we need to sit down," Esperanza said, settling onto my couch where she used to do homework as a teenager. I made fresh coffee for all of us, my hands steady despite the growing worry in my chest. Something about their behavior reminded me of 3 years ago, when they'd first asked me for help buying their house. "Tell me what's happening," I said, sitting across from them. Esperanza looked at Diego, who nodded slowly. "Mom, we sold the house." The words hit me like a punch. I carefully placed my coffee cup on the table, the ceramic making a small sound against the wood. "You sold what house?" I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. "Our house," she whispered, "the one on Maple Street." The beautiful ranch house I had helped them buy 3 years ago. The house where I'd given them $50,000 from my retirement savings as a loan, with a proper contract and everything. The house where I'd spent weekends helping Esperanza plant flowers in the front yard, hoping to see grandchildren playing there someday. "You sold it," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you discuss this with me first?" Diego spoke for the first time since entering my home. "We don't need anyone's permission, Rosa. It was our house." His voice was cold and matter-of-fact. But there was something else there. Something that made me uncomfortable. "I know it was your house," I said slowly. "But Esperanza, we talked about your future plans. You said you loved that neighborhood. You wanted to start a family there." Esperanza shifted uncomfortably on my couch. "Plans change, Mom. How much did you get for it?" I asked. $500,000, Diego answered quickly, before Esperanza could speak. There was pride in his voice, like he was sharing wonderful news. My breath caught. $500,000. That was more money than I'd ever seen in my entire life. "That's incredible," I managed to say. "So where are you moving? Did you find something better? Maybe a bigger place for the family you want?" The silence that followed felt dangerous. Esperanza stared at her hands. Diego checked his expensive watch. "Actually, Mom," Esperanza finally said, "we were hoping we could stay here with you. Just for a little while until we find our next place." I blinked hard. Sure, I'd heard wrong. Stay here? It would only be temporary, she said quickly. Maybe a month or two. We wouldn't be any trouble. But what happened to the money from selling the house? I asked. Another silence. This one felt heavier, more frightening. Well, Diego said, straightening his tie, I had some business opportunities I needed to handle. Some investments that couldn't wait. What kind of investments? I asked. Business things, he said, his tone suggesting the conversation should end there. But I wasn't ready to stop asking questions. Diego, you just sold a house for $500,000. What could possibly require all of that money? I invested in some equipment for my projects, he said with a shrug, and I took some courses to improve my skills. I also had some debts that needed paying. I stared at him, waiting for more explanation. When none came, I felt something cold settle in my chest. How much did the courses cost? I asked quietly. Does it matter? Diego snapped. It was our money to spend. Our money? The words came out before I could stop them. Esperanza finally looked up at me. Mom, please. We just need a place to stay while we figure out our next step. Figure out your next step, I repeated. Esperanza. You just had $500,000. How are you not able to figure out your next step? It's complicated, she mumbled. I looked between my daughter and her husband, seeing them clearly for maybe the first time. Esperanza, my sweet girl who I'd raised to be smart and careful, was sitting in my living room homeless, despite having just received more money than most people earn in 10 years. Where did all the money go, Diego? I asked again, my voice stronger this time. He rolled his eyes. I told you I had business to take care of. $500,000 worth of business? It's not your concern, Rosa. Something broke inside me. It became my concern when you showed up asking for housing. And it's definitely my concern when I remember the $50,000 loan I gave you 3 years ago to buy that house. Diego's face went pale. Esperanza looked confused. What loan? She asked. The improvement loan, I said firmly. The contract we all signed. The $50,000 I lent you from my retirement savings to help with the down payment, with 4% interest and monthly payments starting after 6 months. That wasn't a loan, Diego said quickly. That was a gift from family. No, it wasn't. We have a signed contract, Diego. And you've never made a single payment in 3 years. Esperanza put her face in her hands. I forgot about that contract. Well, I didn't forget. And when you sold the house, you were supposed to pay me back first. That's what the contract says. Diego stood up, his calm mask starting to slip. Look, Rosa, we can work something out about that later. Right now, we just need a place to stay. No, I said quietly. You can't stay here. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Mom, you can't be serious, Esperanza said, her voice getting louder. I am completely serious. You sold a house for $500,000, spent every penny without paying back the $50,000 you owe me. And now you want me to house you, while you figure out what to do next. Diego's relaxed expression was completely gone now. We're family, Rosa. Family helps each other. You're right, Diego. Family does help each other, which is why I lent you $50,000 3 years ago. And family also pays back what they owe. We'll pay you back eventually. Show me proof of these investments first. Show me where the $500,000 went, and then we'll talk about what happens next. Diego and Esperanza looked at each other. Neither of them said anything. You can't show me, can you? I asked. Because there are no investments. You spent it all, didn't you? I want to see the receipts, the business papers, everything. Bring me proof of where that money went, and then maybe we can work something out. Diego's eyes flashed with anger. You don't trust us. Should I trust you, Diego? You owe me $50,000 and haven't made a single payment. You sold a house without telling me and spent $500,000 in 3 months. Give me one reason why I should trust you. The mask was completely off now, and for the first time I saw the real Diego underneath. Cold, angry, and very, very dangerous. The next morning, Diego returned to my house alone. I was watering my plants in the front yard when his car pulled into my driveway. He got out wearing the same expensive clothes, but his confident smile looked forced. "Rosa," he called out, walking toward me with a folder in his hands. "I brought the documents you wanted to see." I set down my watering can and studied his face. Something was off about his expression. "Good," I said. "Let's go inside and look at them." We sat at my kitchen table, and Diego opened the folder with dramatic flair. Inside were 3 pieces of paper that looked like they'd been printed that morning. "Here," he said, pointing to the first page. "This shows my cryptocurrency investments. I put $200,000 into Bitcoin and Ethereum." I picked up the paper and examined it carefully. It was just a screenshot from some website with numbers that meant nothing to me. "This doesn't show any actual purchases," I said. "It's just a picture of prices. The real documents are with my accountant." Diego said quickly, "This is just a summary." I looked at the second paper. It claimed to show business equipment purchases, but the company names looked made up, and there were no real receipts or invoices. "Diego," I said slowly, "these aren't real documents. These look like you made them on your computer this morning." His face turned red. "How dare you accuse me of lying?" "Because you are lying. Where are the real papers? Where are the bank statements showing these transactions?" "They're being processed by my financial advisor." I stood up and walked to my phone. "What's your advisor's name?" "I'll call them right now." "You can't just call someone else's financial advisor." "Why not? If everything is legitimate, they can confirm your investments." Diego grabbed the papers and shoved them back into the folder. "I don't have to prove anything to you, Rosa. You're not my mother." "No, but I am the woman you owe $50,000 to." After Diego left, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I called Mrs. Peterson, who had lived next door to their old house for 20 years. "Oh, Rosa," she said when I explained why I was calling. "I was wondering when someone would ask about that. The whole neighborhood was talking about it." "What do you mean?" "Well, your daughter and her husband put the house up for sale on a Friday, and it was sold by Monday. They accepted the first offer that came in, even though it was below asking price." My heart sank. "Below asking price?" "The realtor told me they seemed desperate to sell quickly. And Rosa, there were some strange people coming to the house in the weeks before the sale. Men in expensive cars, staying for just a few minutes at a time." I thanked Mrs. Peterson and hung up, feeling sick to my stomach. I called the 2 other neighbors, and they told me the same story. Esperanza and Diego had been in a hurry to sell, and there had been suspicious visitors. That evening, I called my daughter directly. "Esperanza, I need you to be completely honest with me. Why did you really sell the house so quickly?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Mom, I can't talk about this right now. Diego is here. Then come over tomorrow morning without him. We need to talk." The next day, Esperanza arrived at my house looking even worse than before. Her eyes were red-rimmed and she kept checking her phone nervously. "Mom," she said, sitting down heavily on my couch. "I don't know what to tell you. Tell me the truth, all of it." She took a deep breath. "Diego had some debts, gambling debts. Men were coming to the house, demanding payment. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me." "How much?" "At least $150,000, maybe more. I didn't know about it until they started showing up at our door." "Esperanza, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you ask for help?" "Because I was ashamed. Because Diego said we could handle it ourselves by selling the house." "And the rest of the money?" She shrugged miserably. Diego said he was investing it to make back what we lost. He showed me websites, talked about business opportunities. I wanted to believe him, but you never saw any real proof. No. And when I asked questions, he got angry. He said I didn't understand finance, that I needed to trust him. I reached over and took my daughter's hand. "Sweetheart, you've been manipulated." "I know," she whispered. "But he's my husband, Mom. I can't just abandon him. He's gambling away your future while lying to your face. What kind of husband does that?" Before she could answer, my phone rang. It was Diego. "Rosa." His voice was sharp and angry. "I know Esperanza is there. You're filling her head with poison against me. I'm telling her the truth about what you've done with their money. What I've done. I've been trying to build a future for us while you've been undermining me at every turn. Building a future by gambling away $150,000? The line went quiet. Then Diego's voice came back, colder than before. "You don't know what you're talking about, old woman. And you're going to regret interfering in our marriage." "Is that a threat, Diego?" "It's a fact. You think you're so smart, but you have no idea what you're dealing with." He hung up before I could respond. Esperanza was staring at me with wide eyes. "Mom, what did he mean by that?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Esperanza, I'm giving you and Diego 24 hours to bring me real documentation of where every penny of that $500,000 went. Bank statements, receipts, everything. And if we can't, then you need to decide what's more important to you. Your relationship with a man who lies and gambles away your money, or your relationship with your mother, who has always told you the truth." Esperanza left without saying goodbye, and I spent the rest of the day thinking about what Diego had said. His words felt like more than just angry threats. They felt like promises. That night, I checked all my locks twice and made sure my phone was charged. Something told me the real confrontation was still coming, and when it arrived, I would need to be ready. I was right to be worried. The next morning would bring Diego's true nature out in the open, and it would be uglier than anything I had imagined. 24 hours later, Diego was back at my door. But this time, he didn't bother with the fake smile or the expensive folder. This time, he came with pure anger. I was in my kitchen when I heard his car screech into my driveway. Through the window, I watched him slam the car door so hard, I thought it might break. He stormed up to my front door and started pounding on it like a madman. "Rosa!" he shouted. "Open this door right now." I took a deep breath and opened the door, but I kept the security chain attached. "Where are the documents I asked for?" I said calmly. "Forget the documents," Diego snarled. "You've got some nerve, old lady, filling my wife's head with lies about me." "I didn't tell her any lies. I told her the truth about your gambling debts." "You don't know anything about our business," he screamed, his face turning red. "You're just a lonely old woman who can't stand seeing her daughter happy." "Happy?" I almost laughed. "Diego, you gambled away $150,000 and lied to her about it. How is that happiness? You're destroying our marriage," he yelled, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "This is all your fault." I closed the door and removed the chain, then stepped outside onto my front porch. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me in my own home. "Lower your voice," I said firmly. "My neighbors don't need to hear you screaming." "I don't care about your neighbors," Diego shouted even louder. "They should know what kind of person you really are." That's when I noticed Mrs. Garcia next door had come out to check her mailbox. The Wilson family across the street had stopped working in their yard and were watching us. Diego saw them too, and instead of calming down, he got worse. "Look at this," he yelled, pointing at me for everyone to see. "This woman is throwing her own daughter out on the street, her own flesh and blood." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment as more neighbors came outside to see what was happening. "That's not true," I said. But Diego wasn't finished. We asked for temporary help. He continued screaming. Just a place to stay while we got back on our feet. And this heartless woman slammed the door in our faces. Mrs. Garcia looked confused and concerned. The teenage boy from down the street had stopped riding his bike to watch. Diego, I said quietly, you're lying to these people. I'm telling them the truth. You're a selfish old woman who cares more about money than family. That's when Esperanza's car pulled up. She got out quickly, looking mortified as she saw the crowd of neighbors watching us. Diego, stop this, she said, walking toward us. Please, no. He turned to her. Tell your mother to stop interfering in our marriage. Tell her to help us like family should. Diego, you're making a scene, Esperanza pleaded. Good. Let everyone see what kind of mother you have. Let them know she's throwing us out on the street when we need help. I had heard enough. I stepped forward and addressed the watching neighbors directly. I'm sorry for the disturbance, I said calmly. But I need you all to know the truth. 3 years ago, I loaned my daughter and her husband $50,000 to help buy their house. They signed a contract agreeing to pay me back. They haven't made a single payment in 3 years. Diego's face turned purple with rage. That's none of their business. 2 weeks ago, they sold that house for $500,000. I continued. Instead of paying me back like the contract says, Diego spent every penny on gambling debts and other things. Shut up! Diego screamed. Shut your mouth! Now they want to live in my house while I'm still owed $50,000 plus 3 years of interest. I said shut up! Diego was shaking with fury. Mrs. Garcia called out from her yard. Rosa, is that true? They owe you money? Yes, it's true. I have the contract to prove it. That's when Diego completely lost control. He stepped toward me, his fist raised, and screamed, You lying old witch! I'll make you pay for this! Diego, don't! Esperanza grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. She's destroying our lives, he yelled. Someone needs to teach her a lesson. He moved closer to me, his face twisted with hatred. You think you're so smart, don't you? Well, let me show you what happens to people who cross me. Before I could react, before anyone could stop him, Diego raised his hand and slapped me hard across the face. The crack of his palm against my cheek echoed across the quiet street like a gunshot. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my face, more from shock than pain. For a moment, nobody moved. Even Diego seemed surprised by what he'd done. Mrs. Garcia gasped loudly. The Wilson boy dropped his bike. Esperanza stood frozen, her mouth open in horror. Did you just hit me? I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Diego lifted his chin defiantly. You deserved it. Interfering in our marriage, trying to steal our money. I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to defend me, to show some outrage that her husband had just struck her mother. Instead, Esperanza stood there looking confused and scared. Esperanza, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Your husband just hit me in front of the entire neighborhood. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. And you're going to stand there and let him? Mom, he's just upset. He didn't mean to hit me in the face. Diego stepped between us. Don't try to make this about you being a victim, Rosa. You brought this on yourself. I stared at this man, who had just humiliated me in front of my neighbors, who had convinced my daughter to throw away her financial future, and who was now trying to make me the villain in his twisted story. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed 911. What are you doing? Diego demanded. Calling the police, I said calmly as the phone rang. You wouldn't dare, Diego said, but I could see fear starting to show in his eyes. The operator answered and I gave my address. I need an officer here immediately. A man just assaulted me on my own property in front of multiple witnesses. Rosa, hang up that phone. Diego lunged for my cell phone, but I stepped back. "Ma'am, are you safe right now?" The operator asked. "Yes, there are neighbors watching. But I need someone here to arrest this man before he hits me again." When I hung up, Diego was staring at me in disbelief. "You actually called the police on your own daughter's husband?" "No," I said calmly. "I called the police on the man who just assaulted me in front of witnesses." For the first time since I'd known him, Diego looked genuinely afraid. Esperanza was crying now. "Mom, did you really have to call the police? Can't we work this out as a family?" I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised to stand up for herself, to know right from wrong. "Esperanza, he hit your mother in front of the whole neighborhood. What exactly is there to work out?" The police sirens were already getting louder in the distance. Diego's mask of confidence was completely gone now, replaced by panic and desperation. The real battle was just beginning. The police arrived within 10 minutes. Officer Martinez was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who immediately took control of the situation. His partner, Officer Brown, was younger and started taking statements from the neighbors who had witnessed everything. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said, approaching me first. "I'm told someone assaulted you." "Yes," I said, pointing to my still red cheek. "This man hit me." I gestured toward Diego, who was now sitting on my front steps with his head in his hands. Officer Brown looked at Diego. "Sir, is this true?" "She was being unreasonable," Diego said weakly. "We just needed help, and she was saying terrible things about me to the neighbors." "That doesn't give you the right to hit anyone," Officer Martinez said firmly. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" I looked at my daughter standing there with tears running down her face. For a moment, I almost said no. Then I remembered the sound of his hand hitting my face, the humiliation in front of my neighbors, and all the lies he'd told. "Yes," I said quietly. "I want to press charges." Diego started crying harder. "Rosa, please. I made a mistake. I was just stressed about everything. You assaulted me," I said firmly. "That's not stress. That's violence." As they put Diego in the police car, he looked at me through the window with pure hatred. Even in handcuffs, even crying, there was something dangerous in his eyes that made me glad I'd called the police. After they left, Esperanza stood in my driveway looking lost. "Mom," she said, "did you really have to do that? He's going to have a criminal record now. Esperanza, he hit your mother. What did you think was going to happen?" But he was just upset. The stress of losing all our money, not having a place to live. "Stop making excuses for him," I interrupted. "A good man doesn't hit women, no matter how stressed he is." The next morning, I went to see a lawyer. David Rodriguez had handled my husband's will years ago, and I trusted him to give me honest advice. "Rosa," he said, studying the loan contract I'd brought, "this is a solid legal document. They definitely owe you this money. Can I get it back?" "We can try. I'll need to file a civil lawsuit against both of them since they're married. The criminal assault case is separate from this money issue." "How much will this cost me?" David leaned back in his chair. "I'll work on a partial contingency basis. You pay some costs up front, and I take a percentage of what we recover. But Rosa, I have to warn you, if they don't have any money or assets, we might not be able to collect anything. I understand. I just want them to face consequences for what they've done." Over the next week, David filed papers with the court to get access to Diego and Esperanza's bank records. What we found was even worse than I'd imagined. David called me into his office to review the statements. "Rosa, you need to sit down for this." He spread the papers across his desk. "In the 3 months since they sold the house, Diego spent $180,000 at online gambling websites." I felt sick to my stomach. $180,000? That's not all. Look at this. He pointed to another set of charges. $90,000 in luxury purchases, expensive restaurants, clothing stores, electronics. What about the rest? David's expression grew even more serious. This is the part that's going to hurt your daughter the most. $45,000 in charges for jewelry, flowers, and hotel rooms. But not hotels they stayed in together. I stared at the papers. What do you mean? The hotel charges are always for single occupancy, always on days when your daughter was at work. And the jewelry purchases were for pieces that your daughter never received. The truth hit me like a physical blow. He was having an affair. Multiple affairs, from what I can tell. The credit card statements show a pattern going back almost a year. I had to tell Esperanza. That afternoon, I called and asked her to come over. "Mom, I can't stay long," she said when she arrived. "I need to find a way to pay Diego's bail. Esperanza, sit down. We need to talk about what the lawyer found." I showed her the bank statements, explaining each section carefully. She listened in silence, her face growing paler with each revelation. $180,000 in gambling, I said. "This is where your house money went. He told me he was investing it," she whispered. "And this," I pointed to the luxury charges. $90,000 on expensive dinners, clothes, and electronics that you never saw. Maybe he was buying things for us to surprise me later, she said weakly. "Esperanza, look at these hotel charges. Look at the jewelry purchases. Where are these pieces? Where are the gifts he supposedly bought for you?" She stared at the papers for a long moment. Then she started shaking her head. No, he wouldn't do that to me. The evidence is right here in black and white." "You're lying!" she shouted, jumping up from the couch. "You hired this lawyer to make Diego look bad. These are his own credit card statements, Esperanza. His own bank records." "I don't believe it." She was crying now. "Diego loves me. He made some mistakes with gambling, but he wouldn't cheat on me. Ask him about Carla," I said quietly. She froze. "What?" "The jewelry purchases. They were all sent to someone named Carla Williams. Ask Diego who she is." Esperanza grabbed the papers and ran out of my house without another word. That evening my phone rang. It was Diego, calling from jail. "Rosa." His voice was cold and threatening. "I know what you're doing. You're trying to destroy my marriage with lies. I'm not lying about anything, Diego. Those are your own bank statements. You turned my wife against me. You're going to pay for this." "Is that another threat?" "It's a promise. When I get out of here, I'm going to make you sorry you ever interfered in our lives. Diego, you're the one who messed up your own life. I didn't make you gamble away $180,000 or cheat on my daughter. You don't know anything," he screamed. "And you're going to regret thinking you're smarter than me." He hung up, but I could hear the rage in his voice. This man was dangerous, and he was going to be released on bail soon. I was right to be worried. The next day, Esperanza called me in tears. "Mom," she sobbed into the phone, "I asked Diego about Carla. He tried to lie at first, but then he admitted it. He's been seeing her for 8 months. Oh, sweetheart. All this time he was using our money to buy her gifts, while I was working double shifts to pay our bills. How could I have been so stupid?" "You're not stupid, Esperanza. You trusted your husband. That's what wives are supposed to do. What am I going to do now, Mom? I don't have any money, any savings, anything. And Diego is getting out of jail tomorrow. You're going to come stay with me while we figure this out together," I said. For the first time in months, I heard hope in my daughter's voice. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. But we're going to do this the right way. No more lies, no more secrets, and no more Diego." The real fight was just beginning. But for the first time, I felt like my daughter and I were on the same side. 3 months later, I was sitting in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and coffee. The criminal case against Diego for assault came first, and it was over quickly. He pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence and got 6 months in jail, plus community service. But the civil case for my money was going to be much harder to win. Diego had hired a lawyer named Mr. Peters, a thin man in a cheap suit who looked like he worked out of his car. Diego didn't have money for a good attorney, so he was getting what he could afford. "Your Honor," Mr. Peters said during opening statements, "this wasn't a real loan between strangers. This was family money given out of love. Mrs. Rodriguez is now trying to profit from her daughter's difficult time." David Rodriguez, my lawyer, shook his head and stood up. "Your Honor, we have a signed contract with specific terms, interest rates, and payment schedules. If this was a gift, why did they sign a legal document agreeing to pay it back?" The judge, a serious woman named Judge Martinez, looked through the papers. "I'll hear the evidence and make my decision based on the facts." The first person to testify was Esperanza. She walked to the witness stand, looking nervous but determined. Over the past 3 months living in my house, she'd gained some weight and looked healthier than she had in years. "Mrs. Rodriguez," David said, "when your mother gave you $50,000 3 years ago, what was your understanding of that transaction?" "It was a loan," Esperanza said clearly. "Mom was very specific about that. She said she wanted to help us, but she needed to protect her retirement money too." "Did you agree to pay it back?" "Yes. We signed papers making it official. I wanted it that way because I didn't want to take advantage of my mother." Mr. Peters stood up for cross-examination. "Mrs. Rodriguez, isn't it true that your mother offered this money freely, out of love for her daughter?" "She offered it freely as a loan," Esperanza replied firmly. "She made it clear we needed to pay her back. But surely family loans are different from bank loans. A loan is a loan, sir. Whether it's from family or a bank, you still have to pay it back." Mr. Peters tried to make Esperanza look ungrateful or confused, but she held her ground. I felt proud, watching my daughter stand up for the truth. The next witness surprised everyone, including Diego. David called Patricia Wilson, a woman in her 30s with brown hair and sad eyes. "Ms. Wilson," David said, "how do you know the defendant, Diego Martinez?" "I dated him 2 years ago, before he was married," she said. Diego whispered frantically to his lawyer, but Mr. Peters looked just as confused as everyone else. "Can you tell us about your relationship?" Patricia looked directly at Diego. "He convinced me to lend him $25,000 for what he called business investments. He said he was starting a construction company and just needed startup money." "What happened to that money?" "He spent it gambling. When I found out and asked for it back, he disappeared. I never saw the money or him again until I read about this case in the newspaper." Judge Martinez leaned forward. "Ms. Wilson, do you have documentation of this loan?" "Yes, Your Honor. Text messages where he promised to pay me back, bank records showing the transfer, and photos of the checks I wrote him." Diego's face had gone completely white. Mr. Peters was scribbling notes frantically, clearly caught off guard by this testimony. Then David called Carla Williams, the woman from the jewelry purchases. She was younger than Esperanza, with blonde hair and expensive clothes that Diego had probably paid for. "Ms. Williams, what was your relationship with the defendant?" "We dated for about 8 months, she said, not looking at Diego. "He told me he was getting divorced and that he had money from business investments." "Did he give you gifts?" "Expensive gifts. Jewelry, dinners at fancy restaurants, weekend trips to hotels. He spent thousands of dollars on me." "Did you know this money came from his wife's house sale?" "No, I did not. He told me it was his own money from successful investments. If I had known he was stealing from his wife, I would never have accepted anything." When it was Mr. Peters' turn to cross-examine, he tried to suggest that Carla was lying to avoid trouble. But she had receipts for everything, and her testimony was clear and detailed. Then David did something that shocked everyone. He called Diego to testify. "Mr. Martinez," David said, "do you dispute that you signed a contract agreeing to pay back $50,000 to Mrs. Rodriguez?" "No, but it wasn't supposed to be a real contract," Diego mumbled. "What do you mean by real contract?" "It was just paperwork. Rosa wanted everything official for tax reasons or something. So you signed a legal document you didn't intend to honor?" "I intended to pay her back eventually." "When?" "You never made a single payment in 3 years." Diego looked trapped. "We had other expenses. Like $180,000 in gambling losses." "I was trying to make money to pay everyone back. By gambling your wife's house money? I had a system. It would have worked." Judge Martinez interrupted. "Mr. Martinez, you're telling me you gambled away $180,000 because you thought you had a system?" "Yes, Your Honor. I just needed more time." "And the $45,000 you spent on gifts for Ms. Williams?" Diego started crying. "I was going through a difficult time in my marriage. I made some mistakes," David pressed on. "Mr. Martinez, how much of the $500,000 do you have left?" "I don't have any of it left." "None of it?" "No." "So you spent $500,000 in 3 months and have nothing to show for it?" Diego put his head in his hands and sobbed. "I messed up. I messed up everything." Judge Martinez called a recess, and when we returned, her decision was clear. "Mr. Martinez," she said, "I have rarely seen such a clear case of financial irresponsibility and breach of contract. You borrowed money with a signed agreement to pay it back. You then spent 3 years avoiding your obligation while wasting over $500,000 on gambling and extramarital affairs." Diego was crying harder now. "I am ordering you to pay Mrs. Rodriguez the full amount of $52,000 plus interest and court costs. Since you claim to have no assets, I am authorizing wage garnishment of 25% of any income you earn until this debt is satisfied." As we left the courthouse, Diego grabbed my arm in the hallway. "This is all your fault," he hissed. "You destroyed my life, and I'm going to make you pay for it." "Let go of me," I said firmly. "This isn't over, Rosa. You think you've won, but you have no idea what I'm capable of." Security officers quickly separated us, but Diego's words stayed with me. Even with a court victory, I knew the real danger was just beginning. 8 months later, I was sitting on my back porch reading a book when Esperanza arrived with groceries for dinner. This had become our Sunday routine. She would come over, we'd cook together, and catch up on the week. "How was your week at the bank?" I asked as she unpacked vegetables from the bags. "Really good, Mom. Mr. Thompson said I'm being considered for a promotion to loan officer." She smiled, and it was genuine. The irony isn't lost on me. Approving loans after what I went through. Esperanza had been living in her own small apartment for 4 months now. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. Paid for with her own money from working double shifts and weekend hours. She was also seeing a therapist, learning to trust her own judgment again. "And the payments?" I asked gently. "I transferred $400 to your account yesterday," she said. "Same as every month. I'll have you paid back in full in about 3 years." I told her many times she didn't need to rush, but Esperanza insisted. She said it was about more than money. It was about proving to herself that she could keep her word. The security cameras I'd installed caught movement in the driveway. It was just the mailman, but I still checked the monitor carefully. After Diego's threats in the courthouse, I'd taken every precaution. New locks, security system, even pepper spray in my purse. Diego had been released from jail 2 months ago after serving 4 months of his 6-month sentence. He'd immediately moved to Texas, supposedly to stay with a cousin. Good riddance, I thought. "Mom, you got a letter," Esperanza said, bringing in the mail. "Looks like it's from someone in Texas." My blood ran cold. Texas? where Diego had gone. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a handwritten letter from a woman named Margaret Thompson. "Dear Mrs. Rodriguez," it began. "I hope you don't mind me writing to you. I found your name and address through court records from Diego Martinez's case. I need to ask you about this man because I believe he's trying to do to me what he did to your family." I sat down heavily at my kitchen table. "Esperanza, you need to read this." We read the letter together. Margaret was a 58-year-old widow in Austin who had met Diego through a dating website. He'd told her he was a successful businessman who had been wrongly accused by his vindictive ex-wife and her mother. He says he lost everything in a bitter divorce and legal battle. The letter continued. "He's asking me to lend him money to start a new business. He's very charming and convincing. But something doesn't feel right. When I searched his name online, I found newspaper articles about your court case." "Oh my God," Esperanza whispered. "He's doing it again." The letter went on to explain that Diego was engaged to Margaret and had already gotten $15,000 from her for business expenses. He was pressuring her to sell her house and invest the money in his guaranteed profitable ventures. "Mom, we have to stop him," Esperanza said, her face pale. "Honey, it's not our responsibility to chase him around the country." "Yes, it is." Her voice was firm in a way I hadn't heard in years. "This woman is about to lose everything, just like I did. We're probably the only people who can save her." I looked at my daughter, seeing the strength that had been buried for so long finally coming back to the surface. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I want to call her. Tonight." We called Margaret that evening, and I put the phone on speaker so we could both talk to her. She sounded exactly like Esperanza had 8 months ago. Confused, scared, but still defending the man who was about to destroy her life. "He showed me the court documents," Margaret said. "It looks like his ex-wife and her mother really were trying to steal money from him." "Mrs. Thompson," I said gently, "I am that mother, and I can tell you that every single thing Diego told you is a lie." For the next hour, we explained everything. The real reason for the lawsuit, the gambling debts, the affairs, the fake business investments. Esperanza told her story with a clarity and strength that made me proud. "But he seems so sincere," Margaret said weakly. "That's what makes him dangerous." Esperanza replied. "He's very good at seeming sincere while he's robbing you blind." We convinced Margaret to meet us halfway, in Houston, the following weekend. She needed to see the court documents and bank statements with her own eyes. When we met Margaret at a coffee shop in Houston, she was exactly what I'd expected. A kind, trusting woman who had been lonely since her husband died. Diego had found the perfect target. "This is everything," I said, spreading the bank statements across the table. "This is where your house money will go if you give it to him." Margaret stared at the gambling charges, the hotel bills, the jewelry purchases for other women. "He told me he'd never gamble. He told me the same thing," Esperanza said, "right up until I saw the proof." By the end of our meeting, Margaret was crying, but she was all so angry. "That bastard almost got me to sell my house. I was going to give him $300,000. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm going to the police," she said firmly. "This is fraud, isn't it?" 3 weeks later, David Rodriguez called me with news. Rosa. Diego was arrested in Texas on fraud charges. Apparently, he tried the same scheme on multiple women there. Duh. How did they catch him? One of them, a woman named Margaret Thompson, had enough evidence to prove he was running a systematic fraud operation. They found dating profiles where he used fake names and fake business credentials to target widows and divorced women. How many victims? At least 6 that they know of in Texas alone. And Rosa, the FBI is now investigating. They think he may have been doing this in other states too. That evening, Esperanza and I sat on my porch, watching the sunset. For the first time in almost a year, I felt truly peaceful. "Mom," Esperanza said, "thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for coming back to yourself," I replied. "I keep thinking about that woman, Margaret. What if we hadn't contacted her? But we did contact her. And because of that, Diego can't hurt anyone else." 6 months later, Diego was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for fraud. The investigation had uncovered victims in 4 different states, and the total amount stolen was over $2 million. Esperanza had gotten her promotion at the bank and was dating a nice man who worked as a teacher. She was taking it slowly this time, asking me for advice, trusting her own instincts. As for me, I finally felt like I could sleep peacefully at night. The cameras were still there. The security system still worked. But I no longer jumped at every sound. Sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones we choose to fight, but the ones we can't avoid. When someone threatens your family, your security, your dignity, you have 2 choices: fight back or let them destroy you. I chose to fight back. And in fighting, I discovered that at 65 years old, I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. Have you ever dealt with someone who manipulated your family? Have you had to choose between keeping peace and standing up for what's right? Comment below and let me know. Your story might help someone else.